Hello, everyone. Good evening to our friends in India, China, South Africa, and Russia. And good morning to our colleagues from Brazil. I welcome all of you to the inaugural session of the BRICS Academic Forum under India's chairmanship. It is going to run for the next 2 days, and this is the inaugural session. And it's a great honor for me to be the moderator of such a distinguished panel. The fact that we have chosen the topic of post-pandemic world order, challenges and opportunities for BRICS, it's not accidental. All of you know that global governance and global order have been very important subjects for BRICS, subjects of great priority. The question of world order has been there since the end of the Cold War. It picked up momentum in the new millennium with the rise of new emerging economies and also with the global financial crisis. The question is, the world order is outdated and ineffective, and we need a new one. But what is the alternative? When this debate was going on, pandemic COVID-19 struck all of us. Apart from the widespread disaster that it created, the most significant factor of the pandemic is that it was a great leveler. It affected all countries, not in equal measure, but in varying degrees. But it affected all countries, rich and poor, powerful and weak, big and small, developed and developing. The best lesson that the pandemic taught us was the fact that this world is much more interconnected than we had thought. And for humanity to survive, it has to come much closer together in addressing global issues. The pandemic also created two schools of thought on global order. One says that the pandemic can create a paradigm shift in global order. There were some visible changes in the beginning, like there was less pollution, more environment-friendly activities, there was less consumption, etc. So this could be a harbinger for better times. On the other hand, there is another school of thought, which says that nations, after the initial adjustment and good behavior, will go back to business as usual. In some sectors, this is already visible. So is it the old French saying that plus ça change, plus ça la même chose? That is, the more it changes, the more it remains the same. Either way, if there is going to be an initiative for post-pandemic order, who will be in the forefront to lead it? That is where BRICS as a group comes in. In many ways, it is a group which is ideally suited to take the lead, to make a new shift in global order. The question is, will it do so? And if so, what kind of a new order will it work for? To address these very important and critical questions, we have a very, very distinguished panel. And I'll just read out the names and a little bit of their designations. We have from Brazil, Dr. Tiago Machado Oliveira, Director of Studies on International Economic and Political Relations of Ipea. From Russia, we have Dr. Vyacheslav Nikanov, Chair of the Board, Russian National Committee on BRICS Research in Russia. From China, we have Dr. Jin Xin, Secretary General, China Council for BRICS Think Tank Cooperation. From South Africa, we have Professor Sifamandla Zondi, Chair of the South African BRICS Chair Think Tank and University of Johannesburg, South Africa. And from India, we have Professor Sachin Chaturvedi, Director General, Research and Information Systems for Developing Countries. The format of these discussions will be, I'll give about 4 or 5 minutes, 5 is the maximum, to all the panelists to make some opening remarks. Then, in the meantime, I'll also be watching the chat box if there are questions from our live audience. Then I'll pose a few questions for the second round, and the panelists can give their views on that. And if we have still some time left, we can have a free-flowing discussion. With that, may I request Dr. Ivan Tiago Machado Oliveira to make his initial comments. Ivan, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Ambassador Vishwanathan. It's a pleasure to be with you in another BRICS Academic Forum. It's great to see how India has taken it to a new level, and it's great to be collaborating for so many years and count on us in Brazil to keep pushing that agenda. I can go straight to my point here. That is, it has to do maybe with the very first view that Vish brought us on how this new world order can be seen. I'd say maybe neither the two options he has brought. We don't have a completely new agenda, a new world, and probably we don't have also just business as usual. So I'd say the forces of fragmentation and integration are there for some time now, and they are pushing in different divergent directions. In the last, let's say, decades or so, we've seen the force of integration being much more important. But obviously, what the COVID pandemic brought was maybe some more strength for the vector of fragmentation, nationalisms, import substitutions, the increase in the cost of transportation, and everything that was brought with this crisis brought some, let's say, some strength to the idea of fragmentation being the agenda for the world. But I'd say that, and my take is that the forces of integration are much stronger, and we can see that in the way we've seen value chains being reconfigured by the way we deal with trade today, given the circumstances. Also, the global health problem itself. So if we take now the Delta variant of the COVID virus, we can see that this is a problem that no one's going to be safe unless everyone is safe. And so it is definitely a global problem that needs global responses. And when it comes to global response, if we take just the health problem that we have right now, we've seen some movements when it comes to joint initiatives that do reinforce the need for integration, the need for cooperation in this world scenario that we have right now. If we take, for example, the COVAX facilities in order to buy the vaccines, if we take other initiatives that has to do with the vaccines themselves, and we had some good agenda on that, for example, on Brazil and China initiatives on vaccines here in Brazil, for example. And that's something where the BRICS, I think, should definitely have a lot more to say in the coming future. So there is a clear need, in my take, as I see it, for more integration, not less integration in the world that we live today. And in that sense, maybe what has changed with the COVID-19 crisis was essentially the pace of transformation that was there. So obviously the world order is always changing, and the movements in geoeconomics and geopolitics are there all the times. And what we've seen, I'd say, with this crisis, that the pace has been somehow has increased a lot. So we have a very high speed movement of transformation of, let's say, decentralization of power in the world, and where I'd say BRICS plays a very important role. And that's why I'd say that for Brazil, again, BRICS is essential, multilateralism is essential, and for a country like ours, having, I'd say, a foreign policy that has a broad spectrum of partnerships that do bear a lot of multilateralism, on cooperation, on integration is essential. But then comes BRICS is important in this world, and BRICS is important for a country like Brazil. What is the role of BRICS in this world? I'd take three important issues here to bring to our discussions. The first one is the idea of rebuilding multilateral institutions. We have the WTO agenda right now that is critical for reshaping trade regulation and making trade really useful in this new momentum that we're going to need to create growth in the post-COVID crisis. We have the UN, many issues regarding UN negotiations that are also critical. And so BRICS has a very important role in reigniting the multilateral system at large and rebuilding trust in a rules-based system that is essential for the world order as I see it. Also reinforcing and deepening economic integration among our countries. It is critical for the BRICS to move forward and go deeper when it comes to economic integration, trade issues, investment issues. So bringing our economies closer together is...
Ivan, sorry, you have 1 minute more.
Great. And my last point, in less than 1 minute, is financing for sustainable development. So it's taking the new development bank to a new position. I think we've been doing a lot, but I think there's a lot to be done when it comes to reposition the NDB in bridging the gap, not only in infrastructure finance, but also in helping our countries to create new opportunities for growth, and especially in bringing our economies closer together. So being a lot stronger to face this new world order that we have that is always changing and is changing quite fastly right now. Thank you a lot.
Thank you, Ivan. You made some very interesting points which will come up in the discussions, I'm sure. And may I request now Dr. Nikhanov from Russia to tell us his perspective. Vyacheslav,
Thank you very much, Ambassador Vishwanathan. It's a great pleasure for me to see and to hear all of you in the times of trouble when we do not have much chance to meet in person, but still we can meet and we can discuss the most important problems. It's so nice to hear your faces in the times of trouble. Unfortunately, I cannot wave you with my right hand because, you know, I was preparing for the Olympics, but now I have to miss it, which gives our Chinese friends some more chances for more golds in the Olympic competition. The year which we have not seen each other was hard for all the humankind, and it was hard for BRICS. We faced some very serious challenges, and probably I'll use my 3 minutes just to enumerate them. First is the challenge of the global pandemic and economic crisis. All the economies except the Chinese were deep down, and actually Russia has just recovered this month the same level as we had before the pandemic. We closed our countries, including to each other. We did some cooperation on pandemic, but we did not provide any straightforward coordination between our three countries on vaccination, on how to deal with the issue, and so on and so forth. I think this is something the BRICS actually failed on. We could not coordinate too well on fighting the disease. As for the influence of the pandemic on the world order, I think the major surprise for me, it has not changed the world order. Because the second major challenge we face is the challenge of external pressures, mostly from the United States of America, which is still striving to be the superpower, the hegemon, still preventing the emergence of the other centers of power, which we are. So there is not much change. World order is similar, surprisingly similar to what it was before. And at the same time, the Americans, I think, are in a hurry because they are losing ground on many issues, most of all to China. And they want to prevent the development, first of all, of China, Russia, and all other centers of power which they do not control. So that's why there is a strategic containment of Russia and China as an official American policy now with the Biden administration. Sanctions we used to face or face now, each of our countries from the United States, and we are all objects of information attacks from the monsters of fake news, all countries with no exclusion. They also try to spoil the relationship between our two countries, all our 5 countries, between Russia, China, China, India, and so on and so forth. So the third common challenge is the challenge of domestic contradictions inside the BRIC countries. We have not very easy domestic situation in every country related to pandemic or non-related to pandemic, especially now in South Africa where the situation is so difficult, and we should actually try to do our best not to harm the countries which are in trouble domestically. Thirdly, there are contradictions, this challenge of contradictions inside BRICS. And of course, the most troublesome is the contradiction between India and China. I think it is the saddest development in BRICS and in Eurasia in general. Fifth, there is a challenge of external crises. And there are many. I'll name just one, Afghanistan, on which Russia, India, China have somewhat different views, but there are, of course, many ways to coordinate our activities in this troubled area of the world. Six, there is a challenge of what I would call of values. The American vocabulary is to divide the world into democracies and autocracies. I think we should switch to some other dictionary, actually, which translates from American into human, because this difference, democratic or autocratic, is very much based on whether Americans like the countries or not, whether the countries are sovereign or not, and so on and so forth. And in this dimension, if we look in the world, from this point of view, we may have in trouble. And finally, thank you, Mr. Shonatan, for your reminder. You want to give me 1 minute, I'll take 10 seconds. And 7, the major challenge to BRICS is whether we are going to face those challenges and whether we want and eager to do that. My answer is yes. So I think we can jointly face all these challenges and prevail in the world order, which is old or new, but we should go our way and not the American way. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nikonov, for those very interesting comments. Now I go straight away to Dr. Jin Xin from China.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. 大家晚上好。
Good evening.
今年是金砖国家概念提出20周年，20年是值得回顾、总结和前瞻的年份。
This year marks the 20th anniversary of the inception of the concept of the BRICS. 20 years is a point for us to review, summarize, and look forward.
20年来世界形势发生了很多变化。我们经历了08年金融危机，特别是当下我们正在经历新冠肺炎疫情的挑战。
Over the past 20 years, we have seen great changes taking place in the international arena. For instance, we experienced the economic crisis in 2008, and now we're experiencing the once-in-a-century pandemic.
无论是金融危机还是疫情挑战，都告诉我们非传统安全的因素对世界的影响越来越大。
Be it the international economic crisis or the pandemic,
we are all reminded that non-conventional crises and challenges are having greater impact on the world.
今天讨论主题是后疫情时代的世界秩序对军专国家合作面临的挑战机遇。我看几点看法。
The theme of the discussion is the post-pandemic world order called challenges and opportunities for BRICS. For BRICS, I would like to share some of my observations.
新冠肺炎疫情对全球政治、经济、社会都形成全方位的冲击。由于病毒仍然在不断变异现在判断疫情什么是过去还为时尚早。
The COVID-19 pandemic has had all-round impact on the global economics, politics, and society. Because of the virus is continuing mutating, it is still too early to say when the pandemic will be over.
所以说后疫情时代到来可能还需要一段时间。
It may still take some time before the arrival of the post-pandemic era.
虽然疫情还没有结束，但是疫情给世界带来的影响是多元的，挑战也是多方面的。
Although the pandemic is not over, but its impact and challenges to the world are multi-pronged.
首先从经济角度来看，疫情阻断了世界经济发展，导致了供应链、价值链、产业链在某些方面出现了断裂和脱钩的现象。
First, the pandemic has obstructed the world economic development. It has led to the break-off of flow of people and flow of goods, and also led to the breakage of global industrial chains.
从长远看疫情对全球经济造成的冲击还将引发公共和私人债务的不断的攀升。
From the long-term perspective, the pandemic will lead to rising public and private debts.
各国为了抗击疫情对经济冲击而注入了巨额的流动性，进一步加剧了新一轮的金融和经济危机爆发的风险。
A lot of countries, in order to combat the COVID-19 pandemic, have already injected huge amount of liquidities to its economy, which has already increased the risk of economic and financial crisis.
国际货币基金组织前几天发布的报告指出这个新冠肺炎病毒的持续传播可能会令世界经济复苏脱轨。
According to the World Economic Outlook published by IMF recently, the ongoing spread of the coronavirus may unravel the economic recovery of the world.
IMF 警告不同经济体持续复苏断层正在扩大。
The IMF has warned that different economies are expanding their economic recovery gap.
疫苗接种率高的经济体可能在今年晚些时刻经济复苏可能会恢复正常，但是疫苗短缺的经济体仍然会面临这个死亡人数上升感染人数增加这么的严峻挑战。
Those developed economies with high vaccination rate will be more likely to resume normal economic activities in late 2021, while those less vaccinated will face severe challenges brought by more infections and more COVID death.
所以经历疫情冲击后的世界经济可能会变得更加的不平衡，发展中经济体恐怕被甩得更远。
So after the pandemic, the world economy will be more imbalanced. Those developing economies will have to be left behind even further.
疫情还可能引发一些国家内部贫富差距的加大和一些失业人数增加，数字鸿沟和产业的代际的这个差异会进一步拉大。
The pandemic may even lead to a wealth gap in some country and lead to a tide of unemployment. And also we are seeing the digital divide and industrial generational differences are further enlarging.
疫情呢从政治和社会角度来看后疫情时代可能全球政治会出现碎片化民意可能出现民粹化这样的趋势。
In the post-pandemic era, we may see a more fragmented international politics and more aggressive and real-time public opinion.
国际货币基金组织也预测疫情之后可能会出现综合的后遗症，包括 在有些国家可能还会爆发一些种族或者民族的冲突，导致经济阶层之间的关系紧张。
The IMF also forecasted that after the pandemic, there may also be some confrontations between ethnic groups and between religions and between the different economic classes.
当然，疫情也有很多好处疫情呢加速了数字经济的发展。
But there are still some bright sides. For instance, the pandemic has accelerated the development of digital economy.
当然，这也同时带来一个新的课题就是数字领域的全球治理应该跟得上数字经济的发展这么一个实践。
Which will also lead to a new challenge, that is our international governance system should be in line with the development of the digital development.
当然了，疫情呢也让我们更加认识到多极化的时代价值。
And the pandemic has made us realize even more the value of multipolarity.
面对非传统安全的威胁国际社会只有加强合作，才能有效的抵御威胁。
Facing the rising of the unconventional challenges, the international community should strengthen solidarity and cooperation to address them.
后疫情时代，我们要防止的经济全球化出现更大的挫折，出现回头浪。
In the post-pandemic era, we need to avoid more setbacks of economic globalizations.
同时要防止出现区域合作碎片化的这么一个趋势。
We also need to avoid the fragmentation of regional cooperation.
我们还要防止新冷战思潮的泛起。
We need to avoid the occurrence of the new Cold War mentality.
作为新兴市场大国金砖国人应该团结协作，为国际社会构建新型国际关系的榜样，发挥引领的作用。
As emerging countries, the BRICS should set up a great example by enhancing cooperation and solidarity and by building a new type of international relations.
首先，我认为金砖国家首先要深化公共卫生合作，来共同战胜疫情。
I believe that first of all, BRICS countries should first enhance our cooperation on public health and so as to defeat the pandemic.
我们注意到
Dr. Xin, sorry, one moment.
Last minute. 我们注意到经济国际抗疫合作出现了新冠病毒溯源政治化的杂音，我们应该坚决反对这种杂音来干扰国际抗疫合作。
We noticed that there are recently some noises of politicizing the origin tracing issue. We are strongly against these attempts.
第二呢，我们要提出真正的多边主义。
And second, we need to uphold multilateralism in its true sense.
第三呢，就是金砖国家应该开展发展战略对接和宏观经济政策协调。
And third, BRICS countries should develop the dovetailing of development strategies and strengthen the coordination of macroeconomic policies.
第四呢，我觉得还是要进一步拓展人文交流合作包括加智库之间的交流合作。
Fourth, we need to further expand people-to-people and cultural exchanges, especially the exchanges and cooperation among think tanks.
这个学者是思想的生产者也是共识的提炼者金砖国家智库在金砖国家合作方面大有可为。
While the scholars and experts, they produce intellectual support, and I believe we have a lot to do and a lot to contribute in promoting BRICS cooperation.
最后我们期待金砖国家之间能够携手合作给携手共建以后的美好的世界，给不确定性的世界带来更多的确定性。谢谢。
In closing, I wish our BRICS countries can cooperate more and contribute our due share in building a beautiful post-pandemic world. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Xin. I must tell you that I gave you a few more minutes because of the translation involved. I thought it was only fair that you should get a few more minutes because of the translation. Now, can I go to Professor Zondi for his comments?
Thank you very much, Chairperson, and thanks very much to my colleague. I will echo what my colleagues have already said because we have a shared view about a number of things. We have a shared view about the fact that the goal of an effective global governance within a functioning system of multilateralism has eluded us for a long period of time. We share the view that the critical part of regions and regional cooperation in that remains also has for a long time been work in progress. We have also been shared a view then about the need for reforms and the need to adjust things, such as towards a representative multilateral system that includes all the regions and all the parts of the world and all the peoples of the world, such as the need to reform things, the institutions of global governance, such as it leads towards a more inclusive decision-making on security, on development, on economy, on industry, and every area of life, towards an inclusive economic development, a development that does not leave anyone behind. It's been a demand over a long period of time, such as the idea of equitable, sustainable development, development that improves the quality of the ordinary people on the streets and all that. And the idea of a just and a fair management of global power, so that we don't use power to display our might, but to do what is right for everybody. And in this, we've been joined by many social movements, organs of civil society, generally in society. It's been a generally shared view all over. And now the COVID-19 has clearly impacted both negatively and positively on this agenda. Negatively in the sense that it has intensified ultranationalism, conservatism, and has intensified the anti-globalism, anti-cooperation, anti-solidarity, anti-shared futures agenda. It has led to the powerful thinking that they can solve the problems of the world, such as COVID-19, by solving them within their national borders, only to find that these problems, as long as they stay outside the border, they have a way of coming into the border, through the borders. It has led also to skepticism about institutions of global governance, such as the World Health Organization and the United Nations itself. It has also weakened cooperation, solidarity, and the principle that is central in that move by India and South Africa at the WTO. The fact that we principally believe that what is good for some must be good for everybody, that we cannot have a system that seeks only to advantage those who can, but it must advantage everyone and change the situations for everyone. And in these conditions of COVID-19, it has become a lot more difficult to intensify the work for global reform. Looks like the global reform agenda has taken a backseat because of an existential crisis. It is worrying that the agenda may take a backseat longer as we now shift from COVID-19 to building back better. So there have been small shifts over a long period of time, for decades before COVID-19. But during COVID-19, those small shifts may have been reversed. And in the process, change has remained slow. Lives have continued to be difficult for millions and billions, over a billion people in the world. Many have been cast further into poverty. It is not good, even with all the cause we do. Therefore, we think that it is time, while we wait for post-COVID-19, because COVID-19 is going to be with us and the impact of it going with us for a long period of time, that we intensify the push for reforms. We intensify cooperation and solidarity as a principle. We intensify the work on the actors that are helping us change things, such as the BRICS, such as many other regional organizations that we partner with. We need to intensify the process of strengthening multilateral global governance. And lastly, we need to intensify the work of making people and their lives central to global governance. And that is what we think the BRICS have a challenge in helping us ensure happens in the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Zondi, for those comments. And now let me go to our Indian colleague, Professor Sachin Chaturvedi. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Ambassador Vishwanathan. Thanks a lot to all my colleagues and co-panelists who have spoken so well and have captured all the key concerns that the developing countries have. And Professor Zondi, you're absolutely right that this panel shares several perspectives across the spectrum when it comes to the kind of global order that we need. I think Dr. Naganov was absolutely correct when he said in the crisis that we are facing, China has emerged as somebody that could cope up with the major challenges that are there. And in my view, there are 7 points which I would make very quickly in terms of how we need to see the global order as it is unfolding post-COVID scenario, while many countries are still battling against the pandemic. The first and foremost is what my friend Professor Zondi emphasized and also was mentioned earlier, is the idea of multilateralism. How multilateralism has to be rejigged, and incidentally, India has chosen this as one of the themes for BRICS presidency. The idea of economic activities reviving in next 6 months, I hope travels would be made easier, and we would have options in terms of going forward. But friends, we should not forget that even before pandemic hit us, the protectionism and unilateralism was already on rise. Though the concerned US administration has changed, but the tendencies are still on the table, and we need to see how faith in multilateralism is going to take us forward. We should not forget 20 years ago how Doha development round was shelved, and the developing countries had to struggle in terms of how we are going to go forward. The issue of priorities and partnerships are equally important in the multilateralism context. Trade facilitation and dispute settlement panels were some of the low-hanging fruits which could have been addressed, and I think that still is the opportunity. In the global finance realm, I think my dear friend Ivan has already alluded to it. This is important. This is important for us to see how IMF resources are addressed in terms of enabling countries to cope up with this crisis. And G20 has already given the call. The Italian presidency was extremely emphatic. I think the time has come that we move forward for financing and engaging with various governments. The forthcoming United Nations World Food System Summit should give us opportunity for localization of development. And that, I think, is a major opportunity, not only in the realm of development, but is also going to be very important for countries to see how the dimension is linked with the global order that we are going to go forward. Because we have to evolve a global order that favors sustainable consumption and sustainable production. The pandemic has taught us this lesson, and we should not forget. The global order should facilitate access to and facilitate acquiring the necessary vaccines, as was very rightly mentioned. Till all are vaccinated, world is not safe, and Ivan is right there. The new approach on global institution, again, I think is important. We need to revisit global institutions. The new development bank sounds more like the World Bank, with which we had so many reservations. We need to see what can be changed, what can be brought in. The idea of credit rating agencies, the regional financing mechanisms, I think are important. My dear friend, Dr. Jin Xin, has rightly said that the world is more digitalized. We need to identify and move forward for digitalization and dimensions. But we also would have to be mindful of the digital divides that have come up. And I think BRICS together have a lot to share and have to together move forward for bridging the digital gaps that we are seeing. The idea of creating global public goods is important, and vaccine and Professor Nikonov is right that we should have been together in this crisis. BRICS could have done wonders in terms of stabilizing the global order. I think China and India would have to realize that they have to work together. They have to realize each other's sensitivities and have to explore possibilities of going together. And I think not only in the region, but sub-region, more of such dimensions would have to be defined and redefined. In EU, we are seeing several changes. In Germany, the change of guard with Angela Merkel going, and France, the kind of political regime that is coming up. BRICS has more to be seen as proactively contributing. Unfortunately, in several Western quarters, BRICS is seen only as a containment policy. We have to come out of that, and we have to give the positive and pragmatic picture. And there again, I think the crisis, pandemic crisis, has also brought out the vulnerability of supply chains. So the resilience in supply chain is important. It is also important for us to see how the big powers are responsibly behaving. As Dr. Nikonov very rightly said, the Western powers would have to see. But I feel BRICS also, as again Professor Nikonov very rightly said, internal contradictions within BRICS also would have to be avoided for us to play that important role that the world requires. And that would provide the stability and the pragmatism that the world needs at this point, as we are in the final decade to achieve sustainable development goals. And before we hit another global crisis, we need to see that sustainability is back on track and we are abiding by the Agenda 2030, which has to be our top priority. Ambassador Vishwanathan, I would stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Sachin. Thank you for all of you. We have heard 5 excellent initial comments looking at the theme in discussion from various perspectives. I had 2 or 3 questions, but I wouldn't like to misuse my position as the moderator, and I want to give precedence to the questions we have received from our very interactive audience. So I'll forget about my questions and I'll read out some of the questions that have come from the audience, which are very interesting. And we'll have another round, but I will request all of you to be very, very brief and give just bullet point answers. The first question by audience is, will BRICS be a loser or a winner under the changing dynamics of the global economic growth? The second question is, which are the major areas in which BRICS aims to cooperate this year? The third one is, what role does BRICS envision for itself in its interaction with the LDCs, that is the least developed countries, in the context of international cooperation on health and knowledge sharing? And there is one more which says, what are the possible pathways that can be chalked out for the medium term, both in terms of financing, trade, cooperation, to reduce inequalities in BRICS countries? I think the last question some of you had already answered. So I'll go in the reverse order, but I won't take Sachin because he has just now spoken. So I'll bring you in later. So I think, Professor Zondi, would you like to go? But you have very little time. Each one will have about 3 minutes. So probably 1 minute for each question. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. I would like to tackle the question about losers, or whether BRICS should be the losers or the winners in this game. Everybody is the loser right now. In my view, even the developed countries that has sought to take advantage of the situation and focused inward, become insular, they all are losers if we do not manage to first contain the crisis of COVID-19, Secondly, rebuild after COVID-19 and rebuild for everyone and not for some. And thirdly, go back to our long-term agenda to build an inclusive, just, and fair global system. We are all losers if the global system doesn't work. COVID-19 has just shown us that no single country, however powerful it is able to save itself from a transnational threat. Now, COVID-19 is only one of over 100 other transnational threats from terrorism to hacking to cybercrime and all sorts of other problems, to poverty and so on and so on. And BRICS would be winners in the game if BRICS arises out of this and this coming BRICS summit with very clear decisions in relation to how we strengthen global governance, how we pursue sustainable development better, how we strengthen digitalization, as my friend Sachin was mentioning earlier, and how we improve educational outcomes, science outcomes, innovation, and all of those things. If it comes out with sober ideas about what we could do with those, BRICS should be a winner. Lastly, if BRICS also uses this moment to rebuild its linkages with regional organizations, for example, the Euro-Asian Alliance, ASOROC, African Union, regional organizations of Latin America, and so on, it would have helped to keep a semblance of cooperation, international cooperation, going. But it definitely has to be seen on the side of those who see this as an opportunity to rebuild, strengthen our age-old agenda for global reform. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Zondi. Now let me go to Ivan. Ivan, you don't have to take all the 4 questions. One or two which you find most interesting to you, please speak on them for about 3 minutes.
Well, let me just take 2 of them, and this one on the changing dynamics of global economic system first. Well, definitely, I'd say that one of the areas where we did see a good change in pace when it comes to the world order, it has to do with economics. It has to do especially with the way the US and China are struggling to see who's going to be the leader of this century. And that's quite clear, I'd say, for all of us, how the pandemic somehow has made it faster, and the movements, be geopolitical ones or geoeconomic ones, are quite clear in the last 2 years or so. Obviously, being China part of the BRICS, and all of our countries do have their say when it comes to a changing world economic environment. Obviously, Brazil is starting to do its homework when it comes to addressing those challenges, especially trying to open up a little bit more the economy that is too much, let's say, inward looking until now, but this government is trying to deal with that. The previous one was has already started that process. So there's a process, I would say, from a Brazilian perspective, of change that comes from the inside, from the change that we need to do in our domestic agenda, but it reflects a lot with the external agenda, and especially in the way the economic system is changing, obviously, towards the Pacific, towards China. And I'd say that would be an asset when it comes to the BRICS, having China on the table and being able to negotiate things regarding economic issues. Again, trade, investment are very critical, and I'd say there's a lot to be done in relatively easily to negotiate some aspects of that agenda among the BRICS. Another aspect that has to do with the LDCs and so on. Our development cooperation agenda is quite different, especially talking about Brazil and the way we do it, from what we see, for example, from OECD countries. Brazil has a development cooperation agenda that is based on knowledge, that is based on technical cooperation, and Sachin is here, is especially that gets to know quite well the Indian and the Brazilian perspectives on that agenda. And so there's a lot to be done, I'd say, when it comes to the development cooperation agenda among the BRICS. That's an agenda that is right now being debated in the Indian presidency, especially in the SDGs agenda. But this knowledge-based development cooperation agenda, I'd say, is a lot that the BRICS could deliver for these developed countries, be it in different aspects, agriculture, health, or any others. And just a quick point that is in one of the questions that has to do with the inequalities. It is critical to deal with inequalities. Our countries are very unequal, and the COVID crisis has made it even more. So there's the social inequalities are getting higher and higher, and also dealing with the digital economy and everything that comes with it puts lots of pressure, I'd say, on us in order to address inequalities everywhere. So we need to go digital. The word is there. The changes in the economic systems are exactly going to the digital world. But we need to address the challenges of inequality that are critical for our countries, that are critical for Brazil. And just to finish, a quick take from a great Brazilian writer called Ariano Suassuna, and he has this say that is, the optimist is a fool, the pessimist is annoying, is boring, and what is good is to be a hopeful realist. So let's be hopeful realists and move forward when it comes to BRICS integration and the role of BRICS in the world today. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Nikanov, would you like to come in and take one or two of these questions, whichever interest you?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Well, actually, an optimist thinks that he lives in the best of possible worlds, and a pessimist is afraid that he is right. The world we are living in is not really can be determined in terms of winners, not so many. I absolutely agree with Professor Zondi that there are no winners in this pandemic, but there are relative winners. And of course, the answer to the question, who is going to win, like in the Olympics, always depends on your will to win. Of course, some troubles can happen which can change your plans, but otherwise, it's just the will, the desire to win. And if you have this will, you win. If you don't, you don't. As simple as that. Of course, I think now, if you look at the long-term dynamics, the BRICS are well positioned in this world. America is developing now after a deep crisis, but domestically it's much weaker than many of the BRIC countries. And American allies in Europe represent now the part of the world which is not economically developing. Europe is still below 2007 in terms of GDP, well below, except for Germany. All the rest of the European countries are well below 2007. So economically, we're moving quite well. And of course, China is just amazing what China is doing now in terms of economics and in terms of research and development. I can tell you, China now is moving faster than anyone else. And this is a great boost, actually. So winning and losing, again, what we are fighting with, we're not a fighting organization. We are a group of countries which wants to a peaceful rise for all the human race. And actually, if Americans behave, they can also join the group, the trend, but their thinking is just very different. They're thinking in terms of domination. We are not a group of domination. We're not going to dominate anybody. We just want peacefully develop freely develop on basis of our own principles, values, and so on and so forth. We don't want to be someone's allies in terms of being a vassal. We want to be equal partners, and that's the principles of the world we are promoting. If other countries want to share these principles, and I think most of the human race share those principles, then they can join our group of, I think, definite winners in the world of the future. Actually, we can call our Western partners to join the movement for better humanity. Actually, when I was speaking about the no change in world order, I meant, among other things, that there was not even an attempt made by any Western country, including the United States.
One minute, Dr. now.
For united effort. As for a united effort of the BRICS countries to fight the pandemic, what I think we can do, if the 5 leaders agree on coordinating policy of vaccination, we can do a great thing. In order to prevail over the pandemic, we need to vaccinate like 60 to 70% of the humankind. We, 5 countries, represent 43%. If we do the vaccination, we'll do 2/3 of the job. And then we should provide the vaccines and production of vaccines in a few other countries, and we'll make it. So there is much we can do if we agree on coordinated policy. And that's something we should do.
Thank you, Dr. Nika. Now, may I call on Dr. Jin Xin?
首先我要感谢尼克霍先生因为你没有参加奥运会啊。
You don't have to take all the 4 questions. Please take 1 or 2.
Okay, only one or 2 questions. 谢谢尼克霍先生，因为你没参加奥运会啊，所以给中国运动员很多机会啊。
Thank you, Mr. Nikonov, because you didn't take part in the Olympic Games. You gave opportunity to the Chinese athletes.
It's kidding, just kidding. 在新冠疫情面前啊，我很赞同各位的看法啊，没有赢家啊，只有输家啊。如果我们不吸取教训的话，那大家都是输家。
I agree with all of you that in front of the COVID-19, all of us are losers. If we do not learn the lessons, all of us will remain the losers.
对，疫情告诉我们啊，这个人类啊是相互依存的命运共同体，必须加强协同合作。
The pandemic has told us that humanity is an interconnected community. We need to cooperate to address it.
这个金砖国家要解决发展不均衡的问题啊，我觉得当务之急啊，还是要加强在疫苗的研发、生产和分配方面的合作。
I believe for BRICS countries to reduce development inequalities, the first thing we need to do now is in terms of vaccine research, production and deployment.
同时呢，要在贸易投资便利化、减贫、科技创新、可持续发展领域来深化合作。
And I believe we can cooperate in terms of trade and investment liberalization, poverty alleviation, and sustainable development.
特别是我觉得要加强科技创新的合作，推动知识和技术的分享。
And of special importance, I believe we need to work on technological innovation and improve our mutual learning.
我们应该共同探讨如何建立面向新科技革命和产业变革的政策制度体系，让科技创新能够惠及每个民众。
We need to explore the way for development in terms to adapt to the new technological and industrial revolution and let our outcomes of development to benefit all of our people.
所以我说，金砖国家新开发银行在这方面还有很大的这个运作的空间。
So I believe the new development bank have a lot to do in this regard.
当然，我觉得最重要的是金砖国家之间要加强民情相通。疫情使很多留学生学者之间交流中断了，我们能够尽快的能开启国门，来互相的进行面对面交流。
And I believe most importantly, we need to enhance people-to-people and cultural exchanges. Because of the pandemic, many exchange students have now stopped their studying programs. I believe, if possible, we can open our door at an early date and to resume the normal exchanges.
我就要说这么多啊，没有占你太多时间。
And that's all of my remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jin Xin. Now, Sachin, could you be very brief and take the most important question that you think is to be answered?
Yeah, thank you, Ambassador Vishwanathan. I understand we are running out of time. I would not take much time. I think the crux of the questions is largely in terms of how we see the future role of BRICS. And that, I think, is a question that is haunting all of us. And I think we need to do a lot of introspection in terms of how the ethical and moral compass is guiding us, how the global order that we all are intending would be there once we start contributing in terms of building, as Ivan said, in terms of informed knowledge-based development cooperation system with partner countries. I did refer to digital divide, the issues that are there that Dr. Jin Xin raised in terms of cultural and cooperations that are important in terms of exchanges. And also, I think the point that Zondi mentioned in terms of identifying the areas where BRICS can really contribute. And I would just like to re-emphasize as part of the question that was there for changing dynamics. I would say that BRICS would have to play an important role in defining the contours of the financial architecture, the role of the multilateral institutions that are there, be that in the realm of finance, but also in the realm of health and trade. So with this, I would stop here, Mr. Vishwanathan.
Thank you, Sachin. It was a wonderful discussion. The audience and whoever has listened to this panel will agree that we had such a rich menu of ideas that it's very difficult to sum up. But you can rest assured that we have very competent rapporteurs who have captured all your ideas, and it will be coming out as a report. For me, the main two takeaways were that all of the five panelists said that there is a need for a new world order in the post-pandemic period. And that new world order has to be people-centric. It has to be centered on people's growth and development and sustainable development. And the second takeaway I hear is that BRICS can play a role, and BRICS should play a role. That was the general consensus. And I liked what Ivan said, one of the writers of Brazil, who said that that phrase I liked very much. Hopeful. What was that? Hopeful?
For realists.
Hopeful realists, which is very correct. Like creating the new development bank and other things. So BRICS is not only a distinct grouping, but a very unique grouping. And we have it within our power. But I think when the governments are doing this, they will also depend on scholars and academics like you for giving them the intellectual and the academic inputs. So with that hope, I'll close this session. But this topic is so important that further debate on this will continue for years to come. Thank you very much. Have a nice evening. And thank you once again. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.